Hey guys, I was super excited to do this video, but now I am a little bit less so excited because Sony came this close to making something amazing, and I have no idea why they stopped right at the finish line. Anyway, I guess I should start by giving you guys a brief history of what this video is going to be all about. So, a couple of years ago, I did a video on this lens. This is the Sony 16-50 SSM constant f2.8. This is an A mount lens. The A mount is what Sony had before the E mount. It is what they used on their DSLRs before switching over to E mount. And now E mount is everything. A few years ago, the reason I wanted to review this lens and try to use it on my A6000 back in the day was because there were no alternatives as far as a constant f2.8 lens that covers the 16 to 50 millimeter focal length, which is kind of an everyday all-around usable length for APS-C mirrorless cameras. What I did in that video is I used this lens on Sony's LA-EA5, an adapter that uses the focusing motor and the focusing on the camera body, and it allows this lens to be focused on a body such as the A6000. There were a couple of issues with that video. In particular, the lens that I got had a bunch of fungus in it. And number two, for video, the LA-EA4 adapter could not go faster than f3.5 and still autofocus. So it was a disappointment. That is until today, or at least a week ago, when Sony released this. This is the LA-EA5. Now, when this was announced a couple of months ago, I pre-ordered it because I thought maybe I can finally get to test a good copy of the 16-50 SSM and compare it to now. There is a competitor, obviously. Sony has the very good 16-55 constant f2.8 G. Now, the problem with this lens, it costs $1,400 or $1,300. It costs way too much money. It's a great lens, but it is very expensive. The equivalent lens covers basically the same focal length, but in A mount, I picked this thing up for $249. Immediately, what I noticed is this copy of this lens does not have any fungus, and overall, the condition of this lens is near mint. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to use the brand new LA-EA5 on this SSM old A mount lens. In fact, you can just connect it just like that. And I'm going to compare the results that I get with this combo, which is, let's see, $250, $500 versus $1,300 on the G lens. The first thing that I'll do is show you both of these lenses up close. That way you guys can get a better idea of size. Here is what they look like side by side. Now, immediately, as both of these lenses are collapsed, you'll see that the 16-55 millimeter G lens looks more compact. In reality, it is a little bit longer. However, with the adapter, that adds about an inch or so to the overall length. The 16-50 SSM does have a longer overall length with the adapter, and it's also a little bit wider. Now, taking a closer look at the SSM lens specifically, it is very well built. It feels very solid in the hand. There is a zoom ring at the very bottom towards the back of the lens. There is quite a bit of heft to the rotation. However, it is very, very smooth. There's also a lock button on the very side that you can use to prevent it from extending if you are packing it or carrying it around with you, which is very nice, something that you don't see on the 16-55 G. There is an AF and MF switch similar to the one on the 16-55. And then at the very top, there is a nice focal scale. The focus ring towards the front of the lens is buttery smooth, and it feels like it is mechanically engaged, which is something that you don't get with new modern Sony E-mount lenses. So this is a huge, huge plus. The front lens element is slightly larger than the one on the 16-55 G. But overall, these two lenses look very similar in size. And even with the adapter, it's not like you're carrying around a ton of extra length or weight. In fact, as far as weight is concerned, the 16-55 G lens comes in at 514 grams versus 692 grams with the adapter. So at this point, I'm excited because I have in my hands two walk-around constant f2.8 lens options, and one is expensive and the other is significantly less expensive. Now, the important thing is, how do they perform? And that is where I'm going to walk you guys through some side-by-side samples. I'll try to make this quick because I have a lot of them. I'm going to keep all of the SSM images on the left and all of the G lens images on the right. So this is the first one done at 50 millimeters wide open on both lenses. And right away, you can't really tell much of a difference. I mean, it looks very, very similar. As you look a little bit closer, the G lens seems to be a little bit sharper on the eyes. And in fact, if I zoom in a little bit more, that's probably easier for you guys to see. Definitely improved sharpness on the eyes with the G lens. The SSM isn't bad, but it's just not quite as sharp. Let's go back to 1:1. Let's move on to the next one. This one is done on the wide end. So this is 16 millimeters on both lenses, again wide open. And let's see, again, very close performance, a little bit brighter with the SSM. The G has a little bit more subdued tones. You can't really tell. Let's go 2:1. And again, I'd have to say a little bit sharper with that G lens versus the SSM. Not by much, but when you are zooming in 2:1, you can definitely tell one is just a touch sharper. Background bokeh we'll take a look at in some other photos. But what I noticed with this image, and probably better to demonstrate this side by side, here is the shot from the SSM, and here is the G lens. So again, SSM, and the G, SSM, G. Now you guys should notice two things. Number one, the barrel distortion right in the center, and number two, the vignetting that you're seeing, and also chromatic aberration, but we'll talk about that later. And so what I did here was just take a shot of a brick wall with both lenses at 16 millimeters, and you'll notice pretty straight lines with the 16 to 55, whereas the lines on the 16 to 50 are very curved. In fact, here's a better way of looking at it. Here is what you get with the 16 to 55. Nice and straight, a little bit of vignetting in the corners, but not terrible. And then switching over to the SSM, quite noticeable barrel distortion. Take a look at the lines that are curved, and quite a bit more vignetting in the corners. Not to mention the difference in the sharpness, which in the center looks about the same, but as you move into the corners, the G lens still remains nice and sharp, but the SSM lens kind of just falls apart. So definitely not very sharp in the corners at 16 millimeters. Here is another kind of wider portrait done at 35 millimeters, f2.8 on both. And these two look pretty good, actually. Both images look decently sharp, a little bit brighter on the SSM. And then let's zoom in 2:1. I'd say still the G lens just a touch sharper, but it is very, very close. And you're getting quite good performance from that older SSM lens. So this next one is done, again, f2.8 wide open, 24 millimeters. Just wanted to capture some of the detail in these branches here. So you'll see in the center, looks pretty similar. Let's move out, and wow. So quite a huge difference as you move out to the edges. Still nice and sharp on the G lens, but not quite so sharp with the SSM. The other corner, you can kind of see it falling off. So here it's nice and sharp, and then it gets a little bit less sharp, and then it just goes nice and blurry. So a very noticeable difference, a bit unusual. I was expecting it to be a little bit sharper at other focal lengths besides 16 millimeters. Here is a close-up shot, a close-up portrait of my wife. This is done at 50 millimeters on both lenses. You can see the skin tones and the grass tones are a little bit different. Let's do one at a time. So here is the SSM, and here is the G lens, again SSM and G lens. And here, wow, this is very close. The SSM looks nice and sharp. The G lens looks nice and sharp. There really isn't anything separating these two besides the difference in tones and colors. So I would say this is a very good result from both lenses. This one is also done at 50 millimeters or so. Just my wife talking on the phone, and I wanted to compare bokeh in this shot. So you can see sharpness is pretty close, a little bit better on that G lens, but the more important part is bokeh. So from a distance, you can see that in both of these shots, the bokeh looks decent. Now, as you zoom in, you'll notice a couple of things. So the SSM lens does have that outlining onion ring effect to its bokeh, whereas the G lens has a little bit of that, but mostly it's pretty creamy. So the SSM, I would say, is a little bit more distracting of a background bokeh versus the not so distracting bokeh on the G lens. This next shot is of a building done at F2.8. The focus was right in the center, but I shot it this way because I wanted to take a look at chromatic aberrations, specifically on here and the trees over here. So this part of this building, that is a pretty stark difference. Let's zoom in a little bit more. So take a look at that, not only purple fringing, but green fringing. So purple fringing on one side, green fringing on the other. I'll be honest, there is a little bit of it with the G lens when you're zooming in 2:1, but it is nowhere near as bad as what you're seeing with the SSM. Now, moving over to the tree, you'll see even more of that. Now, there is chromatic aberration here. You see it's kind of pixelated because we're zoomed in really close. But take a look at all of the purple fringing here with that SSM. Actually, this is 3:1. Let me go to 2:1 just to show you guys a difference. And then, yeah, there is that part of the building. I mean, just huge, huge difference between the performance from both of these lenses. Here's a shot at 35 millimeters, f2.8 on both, and zooming in 2:1, focus is about the same. Let's go to 1:1, about the same on both. Background bokeh, you'll see again that onion ring, kind of busier bokeh with the SSM lens, nicer and creamier with the G lens. So I'd say that one is a little bit better, although onion ring bokeh does look kind of cool sometimes, I'll admit that. On to the next one. This one is F8. So I just wanted to see sharpness kind of edge to corner. So I'm going to punch into this section here, and we're at ISO 800, which isn't ideal, but light was slowly fading. A little bit sharper on the G, but not by much. Let's take a look at the corners. I was curious to test to see if the corners on the SSM sharpened up as you stop the lens down, and most certainly they did. So here at F8, they look nice and sharp. I would say almost even sharper in some sections than that G lens. So I'd say it is a pretty good performer as you stop the lens down, very close to the 16-55. This next shot is done at 35 millimeter, also f2.8, kind of a low light portrait, and you can see just how much grain there is. I'd say sharpness is spot on. The SSM is showing up as a little bit brighter because the skin tones are a little bit different, and you'll see again the onion ring bokeh in the background. Very similar performance. If you look at the hair detail though, you'll notice that the G lens is just a touch sharper. The last shot that I'll show you guys here is just to demonstrate what happens with flaring on both lenses. Let's zoom into this light. Again, this is kind of low light, but it works for what we're trying to illustrate. So flaring on the SSM lens, look at that. So this is an LED light. You can see a flare here, shows up in green. The 16-55 G, you only see one dot. I don't see the other one. And you can see just it's kind of blurry, which is a better rendition of flaring. So it's a combination of coatings or whatever it is, but Sony really did a good job with the 16 to 55 G when it comes to flare control. I'd say this is pretty distracting. Obviously you can fix this in Photoshop, but it is pretty distracting to see flares such as this in your photos. This is definitely less distracting. All right, so that is it for the side-by-side comparison. And what can I say? This could have been amazing, but there are basically two things that I learned from this video and from playing around with this lens and this adapter. Number one is the obvious kind of disappointment that is the 16 to 50 SSM lens itself. It seems that it is pretty close to the sharpness that you're getting from the 16 to 55 G, but it just falls a little bit short, especially in the corners and the edges, and especially from a distortion standpoint. Chromatic aberration, barrel distortion, flare control. There are a whole lot of things that you can tell this lens is significantly older than the new 16 to 55 G. The second thing that you may not have noticed, because I haven't told you yet, is the performance of this lens adapter. Now, when it comes to taking photographs, it is very, very good. With this LA-EA5 adapter, you get continuous eye autofocus, and depending on which camera that you use, you can get up to 11 frames per second with autofocus and eye autofocus with this little adapter, which is really nice. So for example, on the A6600, which I'm using to record this video, if I use this adapter, I can get up to 11 frames per second with every single shot in focus, which is awesome. However, if I use this adapter on my A6400 or my A6100, for some reason that is limited to only 2.5 frames per second with autofocus. So kind of strange, but I guess the processor on the A6600 is better. I doubt it, but who knows? So anyway, definitely if you guys are shopping around for this adapter, make sure it is compatible with not only the lens that you're planning on using it for, but the camera body that you're using it on. Now, the disappointment number two that comes in with this adapter is in video mode. Now, if you guys remember the LA-EA4 that I tested years ago, even though it only allowed you to use the lens at f3.5 in video mode, it did have autofocus in video mode. For whatever reason, the new LA-EA5 does not support any sort of video autofocus, which is honestly just bizarre. I guess I should have read that in the product description before I bought it, because I was expecting this to be a possible replacement even for the 16 to 55 G, but if you're buying this adapter and expecting to use it for video, just don't. It could have been so great, they were so close, and maybe they'll fix it with a firmware update, but I have no idea why Sony would not have autofocus enabled on an adapter such as this one. I mean, they did it in the past, it just doesn't make any sense. Fortunately, this adapter is less expensive than the LA-EA4. As far as I remember, I believe that one was close to $400. I just cannot recommend this combo, and I cannot recommend this adapter unless you are strictly using it for photography and you are okay with the shortcomings. At the end of the day, the 16 to 55 G is still the better lens option. Yeah, it's over twice the money, but I'd say it's still worth it in my opinion. Now, that gave me the idea of trying to compare this thing to the Tamron 17 to 28, which I have now. I'm in the process of testing that lens out, so stay tuned for that. If you guys are not yet subscribed, please consider subscribing. As usual, thank you guys so much for all of your comments, all of your likes, and your support. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think of using this combo and using an adapter. I think the more and more that I've tested adapters on this channel, the more disappointed I am with them. They could be good, but for some reason they just fall a little bit short. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. Have a great day. Bye-bye.